Naimbag nga bigat, magandang umaga, or should I say, good morning to one and all. My name is Lovely B. Mendoza, your discussant for this blessed morning. How are you? I hope that you're all doing well. What we're going to talk about for this morning is the short story entitled The Small Key by Paz M. Latorena. So without further ado, let's start the discussion. What do you think is or are the special attribute or attributes of marriage? Background of the author. Born in Buwak, Marinduque, Paz M. Latorena was educated in Manila. Her elementary schooling in St. Scholastica's College developed her love of music. After graduating from Manila South, commonly known today as Araulio High School, she enrolled in the College of Education at the University of the Philippines. She also studied at the University of Santo Tomas and later taught college English there. She started writing in her freshman year when Mrs. Paz Marquez Benitez encouraged her by publishing her work in the Herald Midweek magazine. Miss Latorena's short stories reflect a gentle disillusionment with life. Her short story, The Small Key, won third place in Jose Garcia Villa's Roll of Honor for the year's best short stories. Among her best works are Mir, If, The Star, and Sunset. She wrote fewer stories and at long intervals, publishing her last known story entitled Miguel Comes Home in 1945. 35 of her stories recently been collected in a single volume entitled Desire and Other Stories, and that is edited by Eva V. Calao. Paz Latorena died in 1956. In order for us to have a wider understanding on the elements that I will be sharing later on, let's first listen to the summary of the short story, The Small Key by Paz Latorena. One morning, Soledad found herself knowing that farm will produce plenty, but that she still had some inner feeling of discontent. She planned to mend some of her husband's shirts which were in a locked trunk. Pedro took out from his pocket a string which held two keys, one large key and shiny, and one small and rusty. He gave Soledad the large key for his trunk and put the small key back in his jacket's pocket. Since it was hot that morning, he removed his coat before leaving to work in the field. When he was gone, Soledad began to fold the jacket and the small key fell to the floor. It is obvious that Pedro values the key while Soledad fears it. Soledad knows that a small key is a key of the different trunk. She wonders why it is that he keeps his old clothing and why he seems to have a special feeling about them. She obviously fears that Pedro still loves his first wife even though she has been dead for many years by now. She reveals that she hates the things in the small trunk and worries that they will destroy the relationship between her and her husband. Despite her attempts to not think about the contents of the small trunk, Soledad opens it. At this point, Pedro returned home to find Soledad in bed, supposedly with fever. It turns out she does not. The next morning, Pedro discovers a pile of ashes and half-burned clothing in the backyard. He realizes what Soledad has done and rushes to look in the trunk to confirm it. Soledad has indeed burned his first wife's clothing. Pedro is angry and bitter that this has happened, and he expects that Soledad will explain things later. He thinks to himself that he will forgive her because he loves her, but that Even if she did it out of love for him, it will always remain a matter of some resentment toward her for doing it. Why is the selection entitled The Small Key? It is entitled The Small Key because the small rusty key opens the trunk, which is a symbolism of the husband's romantic past. Soledad hates the trunk and whatever inside it, for her husband gives an affectionate value toward it. And the small rusty key gives her the chance or the opportunity to get rid of the first wife's clothes which bother her so much. Let's talk about the setting of the short story. As what I observed, the short story gives no specific time when it happened. However, it provides us the knowledge that the story has taken place during a sunny, normal day. In terms of place, the author perfectly described in the short story where it happened. The first place that Paz mentioned is the farm. The farm is where the story mostly took place. This is where Soledad and Pedro live in. The second place is their house. Their house is located in their farm and it is surrounded by wild bamboos. Lastly, their backyard. Their backyard is where Soledad burned all the clothes. Characterization. There are two major characters in the short story, The Small Key. They are Pedro Buhay and Soledad. Moreover, they are introduced by the author of this short story, which is Latorena, as both the protagonist. Pedro Buhay, also called as Indo, is the husband of Soledad. He is the farmer who lives in the farm. On the other hand, Soledad, or also known as Choling in the short story, is the second wife of her husband, which is Pedro Buhay. If we are to read the short story, we can determine that it doesn't have an obvious or any single antagonist. In some cases, the world seems to oppose Soledad. Her emotions drive her to act and portray some characteristics of being an antagonist, but it doesn't necessarily mean that she is. We also have two minor characters in the short story, and they are Tia Maria and Dr. Santos. Tia Maria, the so-called auntie in the short story, she stays at home of Indo and Choleng. She cooks food for them, and when Indo or Pedro Buhay is at the farm, she takes care of Soledad. And Dr. Santos is the doctor of Soledad. Plot analysis. Exposition. Pedro Buhay and Soledad lived in a hut within a prosperous farm away from neighbors. Soledad looked at the beginnings of the abundant harvest with familiarity and discontent. Rising action. Pedro gave Soledad the large key to his trunk so that she could mend his clothes, and he put the small key back in his jacket's pocket. When he was gone, the small key fell to the floor from his jacket. Soledad knew that the small key opened another trunk which contained the clothes of Pedro's first wife who passed away long ago. She kept busy to distract herself from thoughts of how it threatens to destroy her relationship with her husband, but ended up opening it in the end. Climax. Pedro returned home to find Soledad in bed, supposedly with a fever. He watched over her all evening until the doctor arrived and told him that she was not sick. The next morning, Pedro discovered a pile of ashes and a half-burnt clothing in the backyard. Falling action. He realized what Soledad had done and rushed to look in the trunk to confirm it. Soledad has, indeed, burned his first wife's clothing. Resolution. Pedro tried to not get angry. He hoped that the incident can be recalled without bitterness. He knew that the time would come, that she would explain and apologize, and that he would forgive her because he was young and he loved her. But he knew he would always resent her for it. The point of view of this short story is third-person omniscient. What about the conflict of the short story? The complication or main point of this short story is that when Soledad saw a small rusty key and opened an old trunk of Pedro's first wife. Suddenly, Soledad felt angry and jealous because Pedro still treasures the things of his first wife. With that, Soledad burnt all the garments and clothes without consulting him and hearing the reason why he kept a thing that Soledad didn't know. When Pedro knew what Soledad did, instead of being angry, he forgave and understood his present wife. Now, let's talk about the theme. The theme of the story is about trusting each other within a relationship. In any relationship, the essence of trust is not in its bind, but in its bond. So, hold the hand of the person who will never release your hand rather than the person you love. This is a very nice adage that reminds us on the importance of trust in every relationship. Love is indeed just a four-letter word that is so easy to spell, easy to say, but so hard to understand. There are a lot of objects that past Latorena used in her story to symbolize different things, and they are the following. Rusty key. It makes the story captivating. It serves as the object that reminds Pedro of his first wife. Large key. It represents Soledad because she has a power to burn the clothes of Pedro's first wife. Trunk symbolizes how Pedro tried to hide his memories of his first wife. Farm. The green farm represents the feelings of jealousy or envy Soledad has to the first wife of Pedro. Clothes. The remains serve as the main memories of his past wife. The moral of the story. In every relationship, there should be trust between couples. A man should give his full trust to his woman, and the woman should trust her man. Pedro forgave his wife, not even thinking twice what she did. And for me, that is the essence of love, being ready to forgive. Relation. I can relate this story to most people today who are in a relationship. People in relationships today are lacking of trust and get mad and jealous of each other. If a couple is really in love, they should trust each other in everything they do. They should respect each other's decisions and not get mad or jealous because if you're really in love with each other, you won't do anything that can hurt him or her. Recommendation. I highly recommend this story to all couples out there. Since some people in relationships today are lacking in trust, this is a great story for them to read so they can learn from it. They will learn to trust each other's decisions and trust their loved ones so they will not be overcome by jealousy and anger. Let's talk about our reflection. That would be all for my report. Again, a blessed and a happy Thursday morning. Have a great day, everyone.